The owner of this Lincoln MKX came in because they had a steering issue after they had done some tweaking of the tie rod ends to get a better connection with the road when driving. And this customer came in with their Jeep because of the ABS and traction light being on after they had installed a couple of long-range light bars all by themselves. This car came in because of a pretty bad clunking sound after the owner had practiced his welding skills on parts of the rear suspension. The owner of this car had apparently been noticing a small puddle of oil under the car every morning and had been putting it off for a while. When the mechanic got underneath it, he grabbed the front axle and gave it a little wiggle, and it turns out that the whole thing was secured with hopes and dreams. And the mechanic working on this truck found a pretty ambitious rust repair project underneath. Fresh welds absolutely everywhere, metal patches on top of metal patches, and the kind of work where you can tell someone tried really hard to keep this thing on the road for just a little bit longer. And if you ever wondered how some of these cars on here ever get to the shop in the first place, here's how. And this customer came in for a regular oil and filter change, but didn't mention when it had been done the last time. The rear suspension welds on this one looked like they were done by someone who had watched exactly one YouTube tutorial and decided that was enough. Customer states, the brakes have been making a little sound here and there, but she still stops. I think it's just surface rust from the rain. Customer states, car jerks a lot and almost stalls whenever I try to start in the middle of a hill. And this customer came in to replace their lower ball joint just in time. This customer came in with a bit of a leaking tire. This mechanic had a car in for a routine inspection when he found two very different stories on either side of the front axle. And this guy got a flat tire on his way to see his girlfriend and figured he could sort it out himself in the parking lot. Let's just hope he's better with the ladies than what he is with cars. And this customer had installed an extra backup light, all by himself. And they definitely didn't come in too soon to get these replaced. And this car had started to overheat after a recent visit to another shop where they did some work on the cooling system. And this car rolled in because the customer had some issues with the brakes after one of their relatives had helped them refurbish some brake lines. This BMW M5 came in with some starting issues after the owner heard a loud bang when driving back home from work the day before. This car came in after the owner suddenly lost all power on the highway 5 days after their friend had tuned the engine for them in his mom's garage. Customer states, was driving on the highway when I heard a loud banging noise. A hookah engine. This oil pan had apparently been to a different shop at some point, and whoever worked on it had a pretty creative solution to a stripped drain plug. Customer states, battery light came on for a second last week, but then it went away, so I figured it sorted itself out. This Buick Century rolled in because the customer suspected the water pump to be broken, but apparently someone had just installed the belts in the wrong way, which had then bypassed the water pump completely. And this mechanic had removed the oil tray on a 2020 Nissan Rogue Sport for an inspection. Apparently it had just 22,000 miles on it. Customer states, my turbo doesn't go anymore. Can you check it out? And this mechanic was doing a routine tire swap when he flipped the rim over and found the inside looking like someone had gone at it with a tin opener. This car rolled in for a routine oil change, and the mechanic hadn't even gotten it through the garage door before he noticed something was up with the suspension. And this customer complained about his cab not really getting warm in the winter. And this customer had replaced the head gasket all by himself. Customer states, engine's been a little noisy lately, but I usually change the oil every 6 months or so just to be on the safe side, so it's definitely not that. The owner of this car said that he couldn't get the seats to bend over. The mechanic said that it was the quickest $250 he'd ever made. The owner of this Ford SUV came in saying that they have a strange intermittent scraping sound after they had towed a trailer full of corn feed back to their farm. Must have been one hell of a jam-packed trailer of corn feed. And this customer had missed to put their rear parking brake in service mode when replacing the rear brakes. This customer came in complaining about a clunking noise after having done some suspension work by themselves. The owner of this car had apparently been running the same set of tires for quite a while now and brought it in for a rotation. The mechanic found that there was not really much left to rotate. Customer states, I only put top shelf premium oil from Walmart in this puppy, but somehow it's still knocking. And this customer had another shop do a tire rotation for them, but it went a bit so-and-so. And this customer states, my rear door sounds like a half-full water cooler jug. This car owner came in wondering why his brakes were squeaking. The brake pads were apparently almost like new. And this customer had his buddy swap the wheel bearings last weekend because he said the dealership wanted way too much money for it. The mechanic who opened the coolant lines on this one stepped back pretty quickly. What poured out looked less like coolant and more like something you'd find at the bottom of a forgotten slow cooker. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get that premium garage support. And this, folks, is exactly why you should always bring a flashlight and check underneath when buying a used car. Mint condition! Customer states, was racing a guy at a stoplight and then I heard a loud pop and the car stopped. And this oil pan was sealed with what can only be described as a cardboard sandwich covered in hot glue. This mechanic was working this tire a little too well and it decided to show its appreciation. This Corvette came into the shop because the owner complained about a clunking sound when turning, and this is what the mechanic found. The owner of this minivan dropped it off for an oil change, but forgot to mention that she had also left her co-pilot behind. And this mechanic popped the hood on a pretty routine inspection and found an engine mount that someone had apparently decided to fix with a can of expanding foam. This customer rolled in because their car had turned into a steam train after they had topped up their coolant with water while on a long road trip across the country. The mechanic found that the car will most likely need an engine replacement. This car drove into the shop without a fuel tank strap. This customer was absolutely convinced the brakes were in perfect shape because the guy who fixed them had 20 years of experience and had even had his own shop, but not anymore. This mechanic had the transmission out and was just lowering it down on the jack when the jack decided it was done for the day and took the whole transmission straight to the floor with it. Luckily, someone had left a pallet right where it needed to be. When you hit the brakes so hard, they actually break. The owner of this car wanted to save on foiling, so they had their buddy do it for them for cheap. And this truck had gotten itself a couple of new owners while the customer was away on holiday. This car rolled in after the owner said a buddy of his had done an oil change on it last weekend, and that it had been dripping just a tiny bit since then. Customer states, steering feels a little floaty, but my uncle said that's just how these older car models drive. Customer came in saying that he hears a weird noise when the car is idling, but couldn't quite pinpoint where it was coming from. And this customer's Honda rolled in for an airbag recall, and this is what the mechanic ended up finding. Apparently, the customer works extra on the weekends as a private detective. And this customer came in with poor braking power after he had renovated the brakes on his truck together with a friend. And this engine was apparently making its own fresh caramel frappuccino, which started squirting straight out of the drain port the moment the mechanic removed it. This customer was told they needed a new wheel bearing very soon, but had declined all repairs, and this is what happened as they were driving away from the shop. Customer states, put new pads on and now have a bad grinding noise. The technician found that they had accidentally put the pads on backwards. This Jeep was brought in with a pretty decent washer fluid leak. The mechanic found a screw had been removed from the wheel arch plastic, and the washer fluid reservoir behind it had been draining straight out through the screw hole ever since. And this is exactly what happens when you trust your nephew who says he knows everything about cars and can help to fix that coolant leak for you for cheap, but accidentally ends up pouring things into the wrong hole. This car came in because it ran rough after the customer had been in 10 days prior to get a new timing belt installed, but had declined getting new tensioners because they were apparently in pretty okay condition. Customer states, wipers come on every time I start the car. Customer states, I hear a little knock from the front sometimes, but only when I'm turning. My buddy said it's probably just a loose heat shield. And this car came in because the owner complained about a loss of power and that the car pulls slightly to one side when accelerating while making a strange whining sound, and this is what the mechanics found. This car rolled in for an inspection after the owner had installed some Lambo doors and a home-built carbon fiber body kit. This pickup truck rolled in because the owner had trouble starting it even after he tried tapping the battery connectors gently. And apparently somehow this customer managed to drive into the shop like this. And this customer came in saying, you know, I had a clunking noise for a while, but I fixed it myself. Customer states, need a tire rotation. The keys are in the cup holder. The mechanic opened the side door and found that the car had been converted into a laundromat. The owner of this Acura came in because it wouldn't start. Apparently, he had noticed a small coolant leak under the hood and patched it up with an old rag and some tie wraps, but it had just ended up creating an even bigger issue. And this customer came in with quite the oil leak and apparently signed the repair order as duct tape Jesus. This customer came in because they complained about their car having starting issues. And if you don't change your brake pads frequently enough, they eventually just become one with the rotor. This car had been running on what the owner described as premium grade engine oil ever since he bought it 3 years ago, and this is what was left of it. And this guy rolled in saying he hit a small curbside on a Target parking lot. Must have been a titanium curbside. The owner of this Volvo 740 came in saying that it's gotten harder and harder to shift lately and that he wanted it looked at. And this customer came in with an oil leak after another shop had replaced the head gaskets. Apparently, they had damaged the engine block in the process and tried fixing it with an epoxy. And when you don't want to listen to your mechanic, it'll sometimes end up costing you either way. The mechanic who lifted this one up found the rear suspension barely clinging to what used to be a frame, with a hole in the floor big enough to watch the tires spin from inside the car. This car rolled in because the owner had a really strange noise coming from the front at all speeds, even though he had tried taking care of it all by himself using some industrial grade lube. The owner of this Genesis G70 had it in for an oil change at a quick lube shop, but they had apparently improvised a bit when reinstalling the underplate, and the customer now had a rattling noise at idle. This car came in to have some transmission work done, and according to the customer, it had only been 30,000 miles since the last time. This 2008 Volkswagen Caddy rolled in because the owner had troubles getting it into gear. The mechanic said that there was pretty much no oil left in the transmission and the transmission bearings were mysteriously missing. And this customer came in saying his car had been driving a little rougher than usual lately, but that he wasn't too worried because his father-in-law had taken a look underneath just a few months back and said everything was solid. The owner of this car had been trying to get a new battery installed for about an hour before he figured out what was wrong. And when Shrek piss starts coming out of your car, you're probably overdue for maintenance. And this transmission came out of a semi-truck where the owner complained about rough shifts and weird sounds. Customer states, parking brake got stuck, so I improvised a little. She still stops fine though. And this is exactly how you know that whoever owned this Tundra before was a very creative person, because they kept inventing interesting solutions to every single problem they ever encountered. And this car was in because the owner had a loud sound coming from the wheels after they had let another shop do some suspension work on it. Now this customer wanted to purchase this used car and came in to have it checked out. Customer states, my wife took the car for the week and now it doesn't want to start, please advise. This truck had apparently been driven by someone who believed tires were a one-time purchase. Customer states, hit a huge swan garden sculpture while backing out of the driveway really fast because I was late for work. This Chevy Silverado came in because the customer said that the cab feels loose when driving on the highway, and this is how the cab mounting bolts looked like when the mechanic had it on the lift. This rear axle came off of a 2006 Nissan Frontier. Apparently the axle bearing went out, but the customer had just kept driving until ultimately having to come into the shop on a tow truck. And this Chevy S10 came in after the owner said they heard a loud bang while towing a trailer with a 16-foot high concrete penguin in it. The owner of this car had been on his way to a car show when the engine started knocking badly. The mechanic pulled the pistons out and found they had taken some pretty serious damage at some point and could be rocked back and forth in the bore with both hands. This engine came in after the owner said it had started running really rough and wouldn't idle properly. The mechanic pulled ahead and found a few of the valves had snapped clean off and welded themselves into the combustion chamber, and the pistons had taken some heavy damage too. And this car came in with quite the transmission leak after the customer had tried using the transmission as a jacking point to do some work on the subframe. And this customer had just bought this truck 2 days before coming into the shop. And this customer had installed a new oil pan gasket by himself and wanted the mechanic to make sure everything looked right. This mechanic pulled the oil pan on this customer's car and found something that looked less like engine oil and more like something a Marvel villain would call home. The owner of this truck came in saying that his AC has started to rattle a lot at all speeds because his 6-year-old son's favorite thing to do on longer drives is pretending that the air vent is a vending machine. And this car was in for an oil change when the mechanic noticed the state of the undercarriage and that the customer had installed their very own underglow kit.